area that you look at is agriculture, and it seems to be one area you're talking about is improving the efficiency of the supply chain. Another, which I guess would be more controversial here in Europe in particular, is the role that GMOs and modification and creating purpose-built seeds that will deal with the particular problems of the developing world, what role that can play.
We think you need to have both types of seeds, natural seeds and also GMOs. But we think ultimately it's up to the Africans to decide. The seeds have to be adapted to their climate. They have to grow them in test labs, which they're doing, and in test beds. But they ultimately have to decide what's right for their country and their market. If you look at any country that's moved from a low to middle income country, they got their agriculture sector right. 7 out of 10 adults in Africa are farmers, and they primarily farm plots that are around an acre, 2 hectares. And so they need to have seeds that they know can survive in the climate. You all were talking about climate change earlier. As it comes to Africa, it's going to disproportionately affect the poor. And so having a drought-resistant maize, which is a GMO, where an African farmer, male or female, can get 20 to 30% additional yield off of their farm, we think it's up to Kenya and Tanzania and South Africa to decide, is that right for their economy, and is that the way they want to feed people in their own country? Of our investments, of all the investments we make in agriculture, and we make about $400 million in the sector, less than 5% of them are in the GMO technology, but we do believe it's something that ought to be available. One of the natural technologies is rice, a rice that is not GMO, that can be flood resistant, that is sit in a field. When the rains come in Africa, a lot of rice is also grown in Africa. When the rains come, they're coming longer and for deeper periods. And so having a rice that's more flood resistant and can sit there in water for 2 or 3 weeks is also incredibly important. But we think that the Africans ought to get to decide which crops they grow in which ways and which seeds.
The strongest analogy is to medicines. And, is there something to worry about with medicines? That is, might some of them have side effects? Do we need safety testing? And we're taking things that are, genetically modified organisms, and we're injecting them in little kids' arms. We just shoot them right into the vein. So, yeah, I think maybe we should have a safety system where we do trials and test things out. The idea, though, that you would take a technique that promises to solve nutrition problems, solves productivity problems, solves crop disease problems for African farmers, where it's absolutely a life and death issue for them. And you would say, oh, nothing that uses that technique should possibly use. And it's so random, what's considered in GMO and what's not considered GMO, irradiating things and having multiple chromosomes, that's not GMO. Whereas things where you intentionally insert in things in a very careful known way, that is GMO. And in fact, you can't even tell once you have the results, the idea of how it was derived. There's no natural breeding can create exactly those same things. So I do think the Africans ought to have a sovereign right. Take cassava disease. It's spreading throughout the continent. It's a very important crop. There is, in the labs being worked on, a GMO cassava that will stop mosaic disease. And should African countries be told no, let that disease run rampant. It's okay, it creates starvation and malnutrition.
But you also say they should have the right to export those crops to Europe.
No, every country should be able to decide if they don't want to eat stuff. If they want to pay more for food, if they want to use more insecticide, it's okay. Europeans can do whatever they want when it comes to food. Pay twice as much, 4 times as much. It's okay. Don't eat butter. Whatever feels good. It's okay.
That sounds to me like you question the benefits of trade in agriculture, which I would have thought is a huge part.
No, it's better for the world if people have sort of the same view of the merits of things and allow free trade. But at the end of the day, there's always personal preference and choice in terms of what people choose to buy. The big deal here is that Africa has a huge problem, and it's not that interesting to argue this thing in the abstract. It's as these new products come along, then will people try to say to Africa, no, that isn't the kind of thing you should, vitamins in your food? Are you kidding? There's a certain irony that a country, the United States, which has less than 2% of people farming, exports food to a continent that has 70% of its adults doing farming. So they, as a whole, are spending net $50 billion a year buying food from other countries. And the prediction is, of course, there'll be trade, but that on net, their comparative advantage will be such in terms of increasing their productivity and how much of their labor they have employed there, that they will be a net exporter.
And that comes from where, though? I mean, you said only a small part of what you spend on, for example, is GMO stuff. So where are these great gains in agricultural productivity going to come from?
Well, increasingly, the better seeds will use advanced scientific techniques, but there's a lot of good seeds that were done with conventional techniques that still aren't being used in Africa. If all you did was solve farmer credit so that they could get enough fertilizer, which has a net payback, and the only reason they don't is they don't have the education and the credit to get it. We're talking about a factor of 5 difference in productivity for the acreage that's being used, and Africa has a lot of acreage that's appropriate to use for farming that's not being used. So they have to overcome the population increase, the more difficult weather, and they need more gross calories, and they need more diversified calories to deal with their malnutrition. But because of the opportunity to raise productivity, they'll be able to take all those factors and get to the point where they are a net exporter.
And it's not just seeds. I mean, we talk about in the letter, it's seeds, it's fertilizer, it's planting techniques, it's knowing how to do no-till farming, how to rotate your crops so you don't destroy the soil, and also access to market. Access to market is huge for people. And even, we talked about mobile phones earlier, having the price at market is huge for a farmer, because then they know when they send it with the middleman on a donkey or a bicycle or a motorcycle, whether they're getting a fair price for their cassava or their corn at market. So all of those pieces have to come together, and the transport system. I mean, part of what you see even in some countries like Tanzania, they're just not transporting from north to south very well, even in places where they've got surplus and other places where they've got huge demand.